dear students. Welcome to the next class of literary theory. Today we are going to discuss about New Historicism and the theorists associated with New Historicism. We are going to deal with Stephen Greenblatt, Louis Montrose and Michel Foucault. Let's get started. New Historicism became a prominent method of literary criticism in the 1980s in the United States. It is an approach to literary criticism which investigates the historical context of the text instead of its formal elements. The text-oriented approaches of new criticism, structuralism, semiotics, deconstruction. These approaches were deeply rooted in the text, connected with the text. They spoke about the autonomous existence of the text. The meaning is contained within the text. And they said that there is no need to bring other features such as author's biography or history to understand a text. All we need is the words on the page, as per other approaches. And the context of the author's class or gender, the sexual preference, race, or economic conditions were irrelevant to an understanding of a work, as per the other approaches. But new historicists, they gave importance to the historical context also. What can be the historical context? Historical context refers to the social, religious, economic, and political conditions that existed during a certain time and place. For example, if we are studying a Shakespearean work, you have to have a knowledge about the Elizabethan age, the social conditions of that time, religious conditions of that time, economic and political conditions of that time. Then you can understand that particular piece of work and you can appreciate that particular piece of work. Understanding the historical context is very much important. It is without historical context, memories or the stories or the characters in that particular work have less meaning. The historical context deals with the details that surround an event. It refers to the social, religious, economic, political conditions. Widely perceived as a reaction to the formalist approach of the new critics, I told you what formalists did. This school of theory situates the text outside the text. Formalists, they spoke about the autonomous existence of the text. And new historicists understood the text in a different way. The meaning is not inside the text. You have to look outside the text to understand it, to appreciate it. It is called New Historicism as it goes beyond the historicist way of reading a literary text in its historical context. Earlier way of reading a literary text is that history was just a background to the particular piece of work. History stayed there as just as a background. The theorist did not look into the history in a detailed way. It is called New Historicism as it goes beyond the historicist way of reading a literary text in its historical context. That was a passive background. History stayed there as a passive background only to the literary text. But new historicist says that it is not passive, but it has an active contribution towards the literary text. It has a major role in making meanings. Stephen Greenblatt was an American scholar who was credited with establishing New Historicism, which was an approach to literary criticism. And he spoke about the interpretation of literature in terms of its environment from which the work emerges. And it was a dominant mode of literary analysis by the end of the 20th century. I can give you an example for this. Frankenstein, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, you have heard about that work, but it cannot be fully appreciated by a reader who is unaware of the time period of that age, time period of the 19th century. It was a time of rapid social changes in Europe. Lives were transformed by technological innovations of the industrial age. And the romantics, the writers captured people's sense of isolation, and they saw that many people experienced their isolation as a result of these social changes in the society. Frankenstein then it becomes more sensical. It becomes more than a monster story. It becomes an allegory for how technology can actually destroy the people, how technology alienates people. Without the historical context, then we are only seeing a piece of the work and not understanding the influence of the time period in which a particular situation occurs. To the new historicists like Stephen Greenblatt, a history is not a passive background to literary text, but it is an active collaborator, active contributor in making meanings. It approaches history directly rather than depending on any narrative of history. It approaches the history directly. That means other disciplines, other writings that was emerged during that time without depending on any history narratives. For example, looking into the autobiography or cookbooks or courtesy manuals or war memoirs or surgical text, all these are products of particular social conditions, and all these works share the same prejudices, maybe same ideologies or themes, we can say. So, according to Greenblatt, New Historicism places literary and history text side by side for study, giving importance to the literary text and also to the history text. Louis Montrose, another new historicist critic, defines this equal weighting of literary and non-literary text as an approach based on the textuality of history and historicity of the text. Louis Montrose was an American literary theorist and academic scholar. The historicity of the text, it refers to the contextualizing of the text, that is, placing the text in the context which it was produced, contextualizing of the text within historical and cultural conditions, giving importance to the environment in which it was written. We will look more into that when we deals with Louis Montrose. And this approach can also be understood as a negation of the centrality of the literary text in literary analysis. When we analyze a literary work, we always give importance to that literary work, understanding the elements, formal elements, the words, paradoxes, simile, or metaphors, or the comparisons. We look in for these details, but New historicist denies this, negates the centrality of the literary text. They give importance to the historical context and they give importance to the literary text also. And they ask to study both the things for better understanding. New historicism, it's a form of literary theory that understands history through the literature, and also understanding the literature through its cultural context. And some of the central tenets of New Historicism are as follows. The best way to understand literature, which is a social and political construct, is to understand the historical and cultural conditions of its production. But this approach is fundamentally different from the traditional historicist approach of privileging the literary text against the background of non-literary text. New criticism places both the literary and non-literary text on the same pedestal. The best way to understand literature is to understand the historical and cultural conditions of its production, to understand the historical conditions and to understand the cultural conditions of that time. And it is also related to the Marxism in a way. Marxism tends to see literature as part of a superstructure in which the economic base, that is material relations of production base, influences the superstructure. New historicist thinkers believes that it is not just class related but it extends throughout the society. Understanding the historical and cultural conditions of the production, then it is related to another concept. What? The power, the concept of power, the cultural dominance. This approach is fundamentally different from the traditional historicist approach of privileging the literary text against the background of non-literary text. Traditional historicist approach was privileging the literary text. They gave more importance to the literary text. When reading a literary text, they give more importance to the text only, and history was just a passive background to that. But for new historicists, history is an active contributor to the text. It plays a major role, and it places literary and other non-literary text on the same pillar, or it admires both literary text and non-literary text, give importance to both. When we read Nadine Gordimer, the famous African writer, when we read her novels like July's People, Burger's Daughter, we have to keep in mind the apartheid era in South Africa. Then we can appreciate and understand the work in a better way. Historicism rejects the transcendental quality or existence of literature independent of temporal elements. It situates literary text among other texts of its age like the religious, legal and scientific. Like all other texts, literary text also has a historicity. They are the representations of their historical and cultural context. New historicism just rejects the sublime quality of the literature, the exalted status of the literature, that it deals that it is that it is a God gift. Writing novels, writing poetry, it is a God's gift. It is superhuman. It is the new historicist, they rejects this exalted nature of literature, and they says that they reject the transcendental quality or existence of literature independent of temporal elements. They negates the idea that literature is independent of other elements. Literature is independent of the worldly elements, that it is not dependent on the material conditions of that time. It is not dependent on the worldly matters. It is somewhat just like a fiction. It is just a fiction, just for entertainment we read all those things. They negates this faction, they negates this idea, and they says that it is really connected with the society, and it situates literary text among other texts of its age like the religious, legal and scientific. I told you earlier that text, whether poetry or autobiography, cookbook and the courtesy manuals, the war memoirs, surgical text, all these are products of particular social conditions, and literary text is to be studied along with the reference from all these textbook. Then you will be understand the history better. Have to give importance to all other disciplines also, because all these books that are produced from a particular time share the same ideology, share the same prejudiced mind, share the same themes and motives. Thus, we need to read a literary text in the context of several other texts from the same age in order to locate the social context of its production. In other words, we can say literary texts are part of the history and the political science also. Literary text is part of the other disciplines also. You cannot speak about an independent existence of the literary text. Like all other texts, literary text also has a historicity, that it is also a part of history. It is not just a piece of fiction, but it is a part of history. The something which has developed through the history. They are the representations of their historical and cultural context. The new historicist reading of Elizabethan drama or a Shakespearean play would be interested in how the play supported the monarchy and how the play reinforced the class structure of England, how the play constructed certain notions of national identity, and how it maintained and naturalized the roles of gender, and how it excluded certain sections of society from the power structure. It looks for the power relations, and it also looks that how the power relations even subverted or questioned through the work. Following Foucault, new historicists see history as a series of ruptures. There is no continuous course of history or uniform cultural view that can be attributed to any given period in history. History is appropriated by the discourses of each period. That history is not static, it undergoes continuous changes in the field of power relations also. Nothing is constant. There is power is operating throughout the society, power is everywhere in the society, and nothing is static. Every power relations in the society undergoes changes in the period, and the power relations in the society are depicted through the discourses that are produced during that time. Discourses, the knowledges that are produced during that time, the text representations produced during that time, the other representations produced during that time. New historicists posit that it is not possible to comprehend or interpret periods of history completely. New historicist says that we cannot interpret history completely, or we cannot understand the history completely. Why it is like that? Because when a person writes history, when a person narrates the history, naturally his own experiences will count to that. Naturally the historical account would be biased. What we conceive of the past is not what the past conceived of itself. The historical narratives in front of us will not be the actual account of the history, will not be the correct history. Because past cannot be presented as such in a piece of work. Nor we can understand a text as it was understood in its time. Same way, new historicist says that a text which is produced in a one particular time cannot be admired, cannot be understood in a different time period. For example, മുമ്പ് ഷേക്സ്പീരിയൻ ഡ്രാമാസ് എലിസബത്തീൻ ടൈം പീരീഡിൽ അതൊരുപാട് അപ്രിഷ്യേറ്റ് ചെയ്തിരുന്നു, ആൾക്കാർ അഡ്മയർ ചെയ്തിരുന്നു, ഒരുപാട് അത് കാണാനായിട്ട് ആൾക്കാർ തിയേറ്റേഴ്സിൽ പോയിരുന്നു എലിസബത്തീൻ ടൈം പീരീഡിൽ. പക്ഷേ ഇന്നത്തെ കാലത്ത് എലിസബത്തിയൻ ഡ്രാമ, ഷേക്സ്പീരിയൻ പ്ലേസ് അത്ര കോമൺ അല്ല, അല്ലേ? അതുപോലെ രീതിയിൽ അത് അഡ്മയർ ചെയ്യുന്ന ആൾക്കാർ കുറവാണ്. കാരണം എന്താണ്? അന്നത്തെ സൊസൈറ്റി അല്ല ഇന്നത്തെ സൊസൈറ്റി. അന്നത്തെ സൊസൈറ്റിയുടെ ഒരു റിഫ്ലക്ഷൻ കൂടിയായിരുന്നു ഷേക്സ്പീരിയൻ ഡ്രാമ. അവർക്കത് റിലേറ്റ് ചെയ്യാൻ പറ്റുമായിരുന്നു. പക്ഷെ നമുക്കിപ്പോൾ കാണുമ്പോൾ ഷേക്സ്പീരിയൻ ഡ്രാമ അത്രയും നമ്മൾക്ക് അത് അത്രയും നമുക്കത് നമ്മുടെ സൊസൈറ്റിയുമായിട്ട് കണക്ട് ചെയ്യാൻ പറ്റാത്തത് കൊണ്ട് we may not understand it completely. The readers may naturalize or appropriate the text according to their ideological conditions, and the ideological perceptions of the reader is also important when reading a text. The following observation of Richard Wilson and Richard Dutton in New Historicism and Renaissance drama will exemplify not only the methodology of new historical critics but also their favorite preoccupation. These two theorists are going to speak about the methodology that the new historicist critics adopted, and also the favorite concern of, or the major concern of, new historicist theorist. Richard Wilson and Richard Dutton, the scholars of Britain, their work New Historicism and Renaissance Drama spoke about the methodology of new historicists adopted and also about their concern. Where earlier criticism had mystified Shakespeare as an incarnation of spoken English, New Historicism found the place embedded in other written texts such as penal, medical, and colonial documents. Read within this archival continuum. What they represented was not harmony but the violence of the Puritan attack on carnival, the imposition of slavery, the rise of patriarchy, the haunting of deviance, and the crashing of prison gates during what Foucault called the age of confinement at the dawn of carceral society. And he says that they say that Shakespearean plays were not just a written text. It is more than that. It has been said that his works alone make the standardization of grammar, spelling, and vocabulary in English, and he introduced about 1700 words into the language. But his works is not just that, but it goes beyond that. It is the text of the cultural and social conditions of the Elizabethan age. During the Elizabethan era, witches were being prosecuted and executed, and these cultural events took place during the Elizabethan era, and he implanted this into his plays too. Example, Macbeth. And his work also speaks about the patriarchal setup. It emphasized the idea that when a woman gets married, the only things that they would do is to cook, to clean, and have babies. And his plays also spoke about the Elizabethan era people, men, could demand their wives into something as sex of a child. For example, in Macbeth, it says that bring forth men children only. So his works can be the documents of the patriarchal system, the slavery, or the execution of people who were not sticking on to the main cultural ideologies. The new historicist critics, including Greenblatt and Louis Montrose, focused on reading the Renaissance and Romantic periods, and Shakespeare in particular. They were focusing on Shakespeare. These new historicist critics, they were focusing on the Romantic period and the playwright Shakespeare in particular. A befitting example would be the reading of the conspiracy of Iago, who is a white man, against Othello as a literary representation of the colonial act of denying identity of the subjects. In the play Othello, Shakespearean play, Othello is a Moor, and it is assumed that he is from Africa, and Iago is the white man who is the antagonist. And in the play, we can see that Othello's race is portrayed, and he stands outside the status of the white world. In Desdemona's physical whiteness is presented in opposition to Othello's dark skin, and also Iago, the antagonist, refers to him in a derogatory way, and he is also referred to as Barbary Horse. Iago, the white man's conspiracy against Othello, is seen to be a literary representation of the colonial act of denying identity of the subjects. Colonialist people denies identities to the colonized people. They are not considering the colonized people as a human subject. They deny the human identity, the colonized people. And in the plays of that time showed all these attitudes. So the theorist says that whatever represented in the plays or in a piece of work is not just for aesthetic appearances or to not for aesthetic appreciation, but it goes beyond that. It is the product of the conditions of that time. As stated above, New Historicism was a reaction to the text-oriented approaches of New Criticism, Structuralism, Semiotics, and Deconstruction, which were deeply rooted in the academic circles as well as in the curricula of the American universities. With the centering of structure and linguistic science in the reading of literature, the socio-political contextualizing of literature was abandoned by the earlier theorist of structuralism, new criticism, and all. But what did the new historicists do? They formulated their ideas in response and revolt to these tendencies. It was against the ideas of new criticism, structuralism, semiotics, and deconstruction, which were deeply rooted in the text. Greenblatt and other new historicists were definitely influenced by the notion of ideology. French Marxist critic Louis Althusser, the Foucauldian theory on power relations, and the Marxist structuralist notion of conflicting significations inside the text. New historicist theorists were influenced by the ideology of Louis Althusser, the notion of ideology of Louis Althusser, Foucauldian theory of power. We will be studying the Foucauldian theory of power soon, and they are also influenced by the Marxist post-structuralist notion of conflicting significations inside the text. That the text is not the innocent representation. In order to understand a particular text, one must study the text and also the systems of knowledge that produced that particular text. The text and context. Text and the context must be read together as sides of power relations. And the text, by reading a text in a new historicist way, you can see the conflicting and struggling nature of the society depicted in that text, and definitely you'll be getting the idea of the of the background of the society. You'll be getting the social, political, and economic conditions of the society. What is the post-structuralist notion? That the unreliability of the meaning cannot be fixed. We cannot reach a final meaning, the unfinalizability of any meaning or any text. And the new historicist also influenced by this conflicting significations of the post-structuralist theorist. As a reaction against the formalist approach which was prevalent during his formative days, Greenblatt favored a literary approach that accounted for external cultural and historical factors. In a 1982 essay, he designated this approach as New Historicism. Originally, it was coined by Wesley Morris in 1972 in his work Toward a New Historicism, which was published in 1972. Through Neo Historicism, he speaks about the aesthetic relationship between work and its context. Greenblatt later expressed a preference for the term cultural poetics for New Historicism. Cultural poetics, also known as New Historicism in America, but in Britain it is known as cultural materialism. We will speak about cultural materialism in maybe in our next classes, as a form of literary analysis, form of literary criticism. And what is its purpose? To discover, you can say, the ideology behind the historical facts given in the text, to find the original ideology behind the historical facts about writers, resources, and the art they create. That the text is not an independent entity, but it is really closely connected to the historical context. It challenges the traditional historical viewpoint that history is written with a biased nature. History is biased and written in a biased way. And cultural poetics views author as being trapped in his own work, because the facts he creates or events he creates in the work or dialogues he makes in the work may be based on the political force, may be based on the ideology of the time. Greenblatt is widely recognized as a scholar in Renaissance literature and Shakespeare on account of his works. He wrote about Shakespeare. His works like Shakespearean Negotiations, The Circulation of Social Energy in Renaissance England, Hamlet and Purgatory, and Will in the World, How Shakespeare Became Shakespeare. Greenblatt has written and edited numerous books and articles in the field of with relevance to new historicism, culture, Shakespeare studies, Renaissance, and he is considered to be an expert in all these fields. In the book Shakespearean Negotiations, The Circulation of Social Energy in Renaissance England, he speaks about that how certain beliefs or the ideology of the era are given in the form of art in the stage to the people, how the ideology is offered to the public on the stage. And the book provides a significant insight into certain dramas, plays of Shakespeare, like Henry IV, Henry V, Twelfth Night, King Lear, and The Tempest. And he also includes analysis of aspects of early modern culture as cross-dressing, the colonial propaganda in his place, certain law codes he is dealing in the which Shakespeare dealt. The book Negotiations actually begins with this sentence: Speak with the, I began with a desire to speak with the dead. In Hamlet and Purgatory, he explores Shakespeare's representations of ghosts against the background of the Protestant rejection of the Roman Catholic concept of purgatory. During Queen Elizabeth's reign, Elizabeth was a Protestant. Protestants did not believe in purgatory. That means the temporary place of punishment. ശുദ്ധീകരണ സ്ഥലം എന്ന് പറയും. ഇപ്പോൾ ഒരാൾ മരിച്ച് സ്വർഗത്തിൽ എത്തുന്നതിന് മുമ്പ് ചെയ്തിട്ടുള്ള തെറ്റുകളൊക്കെ കഴുകിക്കളയുന്ന സ്ഥലമാണ് ശുദ്ധീകരണ സ്ഥലം എന്ന് കാത്തലിക്സ് അങ്ങനെ വിശ്വസിക്കുന്നുണ്ട്. പക്ഷേ പ്രൊട്ടസ്റ്റൻസ് ദേ ഡിഡ്ന്റ് ബിലീവ് എ പ്ലേസ് ഓഫ് പർഗേഷൻ. In the play Hamlet, the ghost claims that it is the spirit of Hamlet's father and it currently spends time in purgatory. Greenblatt explores the Shakespeare's representation of ghost against the spirit of the Protestant England, maybe because of his Catholic leanings. Greenblatt also documented the life and times of Shakespeare in Will in the World: How Shakespeare Became Shakespeare. In 2017, he published a study on the biblical story of the origin of man named Rise and Fall of Adam and Eve. And in 2018, he published Tyrant: Shakespeare on Politics. In Will in the World, he explores the young man Shakespeare from a small town moves to London in 1580s, and in a very short time he became the greatest playwright of the world, but of all time. And Greenblatt brings us to see and to feel how this boy, surrounded by the Elizabethan life, became the world's best playwright. In Tyrant: Shakespeare on Politics, Greenblatt gives an analysis of depiction of the tyrannical figures. Greenblatt examines King Henry VI trilogy, Richard III, Macbeth, King Lear, Winter's Tale, Julius Caesar, and Coriolanus. He makes some contemporary parallels also. He keeps a fresh outlook on Shakespeare. Greenblatt says that Shakespeare turned a critical eye to the political systems of that time and the power struggles he depicted, from the historical reigns from Roman to his time. Louis Montrose is another new historicist of repute. He also wrote extensively on Renaissance and Shakespeare, and his famous dictum, The Historicity of Text and Textuality of History, encapsulate the essence of new historicist literary theory. That is, they deals with the historicity of text and textuality of history, the major point in new historicism. The historicity of the text refers to the contextualizing of the text within historical and cultural conditions. That is, historicity of the text refers to the contextualizing, placing the text in a particular context, placing the text in the particular time period with relevant, with giving importance to the social conditions, economic conditions, cultural conditions, and analyzing the text. And it also get influenced by the author's background, then author's in life experiences. All these things are taken into consideration. It will be that showing the ideology of that particular time. And textuality of history is the essential new historicist position as informed by the theory of power as posited by Michael Foucault. Textuality of history is the essential new historicist position. Textuality of history means that the major ideology of that particular time is presented through the literary work. Not in the literary work at least, but the works of that time. It can be autobiographies, it can be war memoirs, it can be any art forms, any maybe the painting itself, any art forms. The dominant ideology of that particular time will be presented, and it is presented indirectly through any particular discourse, and it is also directly linked to the notion of power. And now we'll be study about the notion of power posited by Michel Foucault. To Foucault, history is a social structure determined by the dominant discursive practices. The dominant discourse of each period constructs the narrative of history. The dominant discourse of each period can be the novel, can be the drama, can be the poems, anything constructs the narrative of history, anything that presents history before us, but um, it is presented before us in terms of the power. The dominant ideologies are presented before the people. Dominant ideologies are presented before us through the various art forms. When analyzing literature, also, by analyzing literature, by studying the historical conditions, by studying the cultural conditions of that time, we are understanding the history of that time. Like history, it's not just history is not to be understood in terms of the great men and women, or in terms of enlightenment, in terms of renaissance, but it is also made up of conflicting visions and attitudes. New historicists just reject any single interpretation of a particular age, believing that every age has its own tensions, every age has seen conflicts and struggles in the society. New historicist looks into the themes of the text, or the dialogues in the text, or anything in the text, or the text as such, where they see the existing belief systems, or the values, or the visions of the society, or the power relations in the society, or they may look into how the power relations are questioned in the particular work. Montreux's chief areas of study are Renaissance drama and Elizabethan age. The purpose of playing Shakespeare and the cultural politics of the Elizabethan theatre, subject of Elizabeth, authority, gender and representation are two of his books. In the work The Purpose of Playing Shakespeare and the Cultural Politics of the Elizabethan Theatre, he speaks about the social and cultural context within which Elizabethan dramas were created. Montrose first he locates the theatre in the ideological framework of the Elizabethan culture. The purpose of playing in the book, he demonstrates how the language of that time shaped the cultural value, beliefs, and understanding. Play itself, how it shapes the cultural values, beliefs, and understanding. Also, it shows about the interaction, the political control in the society. Montrose, through the work Subject of Elizabeth, Authority, Gender and Representation, he gives the account of the text, pictures and performances during that time in which the Queen was presented to her people. It was presented how Queen was presented to people regarding her power, regarding her court, presented before the people with all its richness and fascination, and how she managed to rule in the patriarchal society. New Historicism employs the theory of power developed by French philosopher Michel Foucault. In his concept of power, Foucault was influenced by German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche. New Historicist adapts view of history where they say that all events of the past are available to people in the form of text of different genres, text of autobiography, manual, courtesy manuals, war memoirs, surgical text, biology, law books, religious books, books that are related to medicine, natural philosophy, natural sciences, political philosophy. These are all the texts of an age. And history is available to people in the form of these texts. And from the text, we'll be able to understand the power relations. Textuality of history is related to the concept of power. the social power relations in the society. And social power relations determine what narratives can get written and in what form these ideologies should permeate in the society. And through culture, culture is also about power, where power works through power works in a very subtle way but with very harmful effects on the society, that the ideology is get into the society and it inspires people to adopt interest and beliefs of the dominant ideology. Nietzsche is a German philosopher. Will to power is a prominent concept in the philosophy of Friedrich Nietzsche. He says that power or the will to power is the main driving force in humans. The power is the main driving force. Nietzsche conceived power as a physical force that operates in the physical world. As per Nietzsche, this force is found in all individuals. In his works like Human, All Too Human, and Daybreak, Nietzsche devotes his attention to psychology also. And he explains that certain aspects of human behavior is there, that their over desire for domination and mastery, to hold power in their hands or over others or in the environment, the will to power. Nietzsche conceived power as a physical force that operates in a physical world for mastering others. Nietzsche says that we exercise power over the people. Sometimes it may benefit them and sometimes it hurts them. When we hurt them, it is in a dangerous way because they may seek to revenge. And he also says that making someone indebted to us is also a preferable way to sense power. That means that is there in the society, that is there in our daily lives. Power is there in our daily life. The world, according to him, is powers in motion. The network of mutually contending forces is life, according to Nietzsche. That means we can see the conflicting ideologies in the society. But Michel Foucault, he was more interested in how power works in the world than what it is. How the power works in the world, how the power works in every sphere of the society, in every walks of life, how the power works. That was the concern of Foucault. Foucault was a French philosopher, a writer, political activist, and literary critic, and his theories addresses the relationship between power and knowledge and how they are used, how the power is used as a form of social control, how the power is used as a form of social control through certain institutions of the society. It can be religious institutions, even we can say educational institutions too. He is critical of the traditional notion of power, which is being purely located in the state or the administration of the nation state. For example, how the kings derived their authority and how they gained power through succession, or we can say the political parties, how the power is within the people in governance. According to him, the very existence of the state, in fact, depends on the operation of thousands of complex micro relations of power at every level of the social body. Foucault says that state is a concept and where there are many laws are arranged, many judicial laws are arranged, or decisions are taken, or certain acts are there for the functioning, and everything is dependent on the power, the relations of power in the society, the dominance in the society, and it happens across the society. In the whole society, the power is operated. Foucault says that state is not the primary source of power. State is a codification of relations of power. The laws or the judicial decisions or the laws are arranged in the society according to the power relations. The power operates at all levels in the society. And he says it is a concept. He says that power is not a thing but a relation. And power is not always repressive, but it is productive also. And power is not something that is there in the governance or in the state, but it is exercised throughout the whole society, throughout the social body, and it operates at the micro levels of the social relations also. Relations with people, relations with institutions, relations with the government, or relations with the things. Power is omnipresent at every level of the social body. And the exercise of power is like warlike. If you feel that something has a dominance over you, then there is power is operating there. If mobile phones, you cannot get alienated from the social networking apps. Power of the mobile phone is operating there. The power which makes us inferior, which makes us submissive to something, power operates there. Foucault says that individual is not something that needs to be liberated. It's not a free thing. But individual is the closely monitored product. People are getting monitored. And it is the monitored product of relations between power and knowledge. Power operates in the society subtly. The dominance may not be seen at a glance, but power is there and the individuals are under the influence of the power. The into individual is tied into a whole network of relations. Individuals into tied into a whole network of institutions and relations in the society. And institutions works in a way that certain people are advantaged. This is also related to power. The grand strategies of the state rely on the cooperation of whole network of local and individualized tactics of power in which everybody is involved. The whole society is under power, under the dominance of a particular ideology. Or you can say power operates in the society through institutions, and where there is only a certain people are getting advantages. Power operates in different levels, and all relations of power work together and against each other in constantly shifting combinations. That means the power structure changes in the society. Nothing is constant. The power shifts. One time power is with one hand and the power keeps on changing. The state is merely a configuration of multiple power relations. There are multiple power relations operating in the society. Power is not a personal phenomenon or capacity wielded by an individual or group of individuals. The power is not physical, not the physical capacity. It is impersonal. Foucault famously declared that power is everywhere. Power operates everywhere in the society. It can be identified by means of the techniques it exercises. One cannot escape power. Everybody is under the power relation only. Power is there in the society. Power is everywhere in the society. Foucault was influenced by structuralism and Heidegger in addition to Nietzsche. He was influenced by the structuralism, Nietzsche, and also Heidegger. Heidegger was a German philosopher of 20th century, and he said that the technology has become so pervasive that there is no realm of life that is not under its dominance. It was Nietzsche who rejected the notion that history unfolds in a rational way, which involves a sense of progress, of movement forward. Nietzsche rejected the notion that history is a time period that we are moving forward. We cannot say, nowadays people say that, or even in the 21st century, people say that we are far better than the 20th century people. Our living standards are high. But he says that Nietzsche rejected this notion. History which takes you forward, it has a sense of progress. According to Foucault, power is a structure of action that cannot be attributed, as it is a complex set of structures. Power is not just a thing, but it is a relation. Power is productive. It is not property of the state. It is not something that is with the government and the state. But power is exercised throughout the social body. It is very complex set of structures. Power operates at the most micro levels of social relations. It operates in a structure. In every institution it operates. Power is omnipresent at every level of the social body. Power cannot be located anywhere in the society because it is circulated, diffused everywhere in the society. Power is everywhere in the society. It is a system of relations. It is not a thing, but it is a system of relations. Foucault says that power produces different types of knowledge in the society, which actually influences people's activities and their existence. Knowledge then again reinforces and exercises power in the society. Foucault's other famous observation is that where there is power, there is resistance. Is in the line of Nietzsche. Where there is power, there is resistance. He says that there are a number of ways in which exercise of power can be resisted in the society. If there is a power relation, there is a possibility of resistance. There is always the possibility of resistance in the society, resistance against the power in society, no matter how oppressive the system is. പവർ സൊസൈറ്റിയിൽ ഉണ്ടെങ്കിൽ അതിന് അഗെൻസ്റ്റ് ആയിട്ട് ഒരു റെസിസ്റ്റൻസും ഉണ്ടാവും. ഫോർ എക്സാമ്പിൾ പെട്രിയാർക്കിയൽ പവർ സിസ്റ്റത്തിന് അഗെൻസ്റ്റ് ആയിട്ട് ഫെമിനിസം വന്നു. അത് ആ ഒരു സിസ്റ്റത്തിൽ ഒരുപാട് ചേഞ്ചസ് ഉണ്ടാക്കി. ഇറ്റ് ബിക്കെയിം എ പ്രാക്ടീസ്. Greenblatt was tremendously influenced by the anti-establishment notions of Foucault, and he attempted to read history in terms of the concept of power. Power is a major concept. Then comes in New Historicism, the concept of power which put forward by Nietzsche. Of particular concern to Greenblatt and other new historicists is Foucault's concept of the interrelationship of power and knowledge. So new historicist also looks into the relationship of power and knowledge. Knowledge begets power and vice versa. Power creates knowledge. Knowledge gives rise to power and power creates the knowledge. The mechanisms of power, the power relations in the society produce different types of knowledge which actually influences people's activities and existence. Knowledge is actually constructed or organized and shared in the society. How it is shared in the society? Through the speech, or in the form of writing, or we can say in the form of discourse. Knowledge is shared in the society. Knowledge is constructed in the society. And now knowledge is influenced by power. Foucault sees history as the dominant structures of knowledge in each historical period and their social context. Foucault sees history as the dominant structures of knowledge in each historical period and their social context. History, the past human affairs or the human actions, also influenced by knowledge and the power structure. History is actually a dominant structure of knowledge where power operates. In any particular society, in any particular disciplines, knowledge is carefully controlled by certain authorities using their power. Knowledge is constructed, organized, and shared in the society. Knowledge gathered in the society or the knowledge gathered by the individual reinforces the power relations in the society. An important notion in Foucauldian power structure is that of discourses. Discourses can be understood as the organization of knowledge and truth in a social structure. Discourse, you can say it is the context of speech, or it is the representation itself, or knowledge or understanding. It defines what can be said, studied, and the process also. It is the context in which meaning is produced. From the speech, meaning is produced, from the representations, meaning is produced, from the knowledge, meaning is produced in the society. Discourse is the context of speech, representation, knowledge, and understanding. Through discourses, knowledge is organized and given to the society in the form of discourses. It can discursive practice, a term is there. It refers to a set of rules for producing different forms of knowledge. Discourses actually construct and legitimize the unequal power relations in the society. Foucault's work showed how the sections of society, how people have been subjugated through certain discourses. And Foucault shows that how certain institutional forms of control were created in the society to ensure that certain section of people are always under subjugation. The discourse and certain institutional structures in the society combined to give power to a particular class or to particular class or authorities in the society. The discourses actually help the people in power to retain their power over the other people, over the other sections, over marginal people, over the subordinates. How do they do that? By the creation and control of particular discourses. Remember, what is a discourse? It is where knowledge is constructed and shared through particular form of speech or writing in the society. The knowledge is shared in the society through maybe in the form of novel, in the form of painting, in the form of cinema. That is called discourse. It is the context of speech or representation or knowledge. And it also refers to the power relations inherent in the organization of knowledge within that social structure. It is material in nature. Foucault famously, because I told you discourses are the knowledge that is constructed and shared in the society through speech or writing or through language. Foucault famously invokes the concept of the panopticon, first conceived by Jeremy Bentham, as a system of control in a prison where the guard can watch all inmates while no inmate can know he is being watched. Panopticon, that is a concept brought to life in the form of a central observation tower that is placed within a circle of prison cells, so that from the tower the guard can see every cell and inmate, but the inmates can't see into the tower. So prisoners will never know whether they are being watched or not. Panopticon, that's a type of institutional building and which is designed by Jeremy Bentham, an English philosopher. From the tower, the prisoners can be observed by a guard. It is that the prisoners don't know whether they are being watched or not, but they are forced to behave in such a way that they are being watched at all times. So the inmates are effectively compelled to regulate their own behavior, that they need to behave properly. It is his prison is widely meant by the term panopticon. Discursive practices of the state makes it panoptic. Discursive practices of the state actually makes these practices panoptic, denoting its capacity of the discursive practices to wield power in all walks of social life. The life of the people is controlled by the discourses. The power of the state here is invisible. Power is invisible in the society, but the power operates everywhere in the society. Following the Foucauldian theory of power, new historicists seek to find out how discursive practices form a historical period and how they are represented in the text. Thus, new historicism sees history as not as a linear narrative but as a series of ruptured knowledges. The knowledge breaks in the society ridden with power plays. Marotti and Jane Tompkins are other noted historicists. Jane Tompkins is an American literary scholar. Old and new historicisms. New historicism, we have already studied it. It's a mode of study where literary text and non-literary context, the other disciplines, are also given equal weightage in understanding the history. Whereas old historicism, it considers history as a background of the facts. Background, historical things are just a background, a passive background to the literature. It follows a hierarchical approach. It creates a historical framework. It just places the literary text within it. Literary text. Old historicist place literary text in the history, in the historical context. New historicism upholds the Derridean view that there is nothing outside the text. That means everything is available to us in the textual form. Everything is a text. And it follows a parallel reading of literature and history, or literature and other disciplines along with it. Literature is not given more importance. History is also given its importance. And it sees as a power relation. Historicism reads a literary work against its historical background, a passive background. What was explored was the historicity of the text. Literary text was foregrounded, it was given more importance. For the literary text was given more importance, and the history or the historical text was backgrounded. There was only a passive existence for the historical background. E.M.W. Tillyard. Examples: how the Elizabethan worldview and value system are reflected in the plays of Shakespeare in his works like Shakespeare's Last Plays, Shakespeare's History Plays, Shakespeare's Problem Plays, and the influential short essay Elizabethan World Picture. E.M.W. Tillyard was an English scholar. Tillyard explored on the Elizabethan value systems, Elizabethan beliefs and practices in the Shakespearean works. He created a historical framework for the works of Shakespeare, and he dealt with the close reading of the text. Understanding the text. Text was given primary importance. But new historicism neither foregrounds nor backgrounds the text. It adopts the method of equal weighting. Old historians were trying to understand the past by referring the documents about the past. And they create a unified narrative of history. But new historicists try to identify the ruptures, try to identify the fissures in the society. It is the understanding of knowledge as a manifestation of power. And new historicist shows us the struggles and conflicts in the history. Old historicism views history as a linear progress of events and forces, but to new historicists it is text reminiscing of nothing is outside the text. Everything is inside the text. Post-structuralist influence makes new historicists view knowledge and truth skeptically. We cannot fix a correct meaning to all these things, truth or knowledge. Contrary to the historicist approach giving primacy to the text, new historicism reads the text as a site of conflicting interest. So we have discussed all these things. So I'm stopping here. Let's continue with cultural materialism in the next class.